Would you believe me if I told you that your earliest life experiences have an enduring influence on your relationship with God? Now, what I mean when I say early life experiences, I'm talking about like 18 months of age. By the time an infant reaches 18 months, researchers can accurately identify that infant's attachment style. And what research has demonstrated over the past few decades is that attachment style persists across the lifespan and it influences just about every significant relationship of our lives. So let's talk a little bit about attachment before we see how this relates to God. Attachment refers to a behavioral system that helps infants maintain proximity to their caregivers. It does not do us much good for survival if infants and caregivers get too far apart. Yeah? So when there is the threat, let's say, of separation or loss, the infant will become distressed. And it engages in all sorts of behaviors, right? We cry, we lift up our arms, we crawl back toward the caregiver if we have the means. Yeah? So attachment refers to the system that maintains proximity. And early in attachment research, it was theorized that this was only for the sake of survival. However, more recent researchers have suggested that it also plays a key role in social learning. Now, we'll have a little bit more to say about that later on, because it makes a big difference. For the time being, let's say that an attachment relationship is characterized by five features. You've got the individual and you've got the attachment figure. The attachment figure is a stronger and wiser other. It's someone that the individual attempts to maintain proximity to. It's someone who provides a safe haven in times of distress. It's someone who provides a secure base for exploration of the environment. And it's someone that, if there's separation or loss, it will bring about distress, protest, and grief on the part of the individual. These are the characteristics of an attachment relationship. So it's not necessarily someone that you're just close to, someone you care about. When we're talking about attachment, and we're being true to the technical designation, these are the five characteristics. Now, as I mentioned, researchers can assess attachment style at 18 months of age. And this is predictive of their behavior at 5 or 6 years old. It's predictive of their long-term mental health, well-being, emotional coping strategies, all kinds of things. Uh, there are two dimensions of attachment insecurity, let's say. When all's going well, we develop secure attachments. And this is the case when we have sensitive, responsive, well-attuned caregivers. Now, when we don't have that, they're not sensitive, responsive, reliable, well-attuned, any of these things, we develop two different kinds of insecurity. One of these we'll call the dimension of avoidance. And avoidance is basically a resistance to emotional closeness or dependency on the caregiver. It often results in a kind of compulsive self-reliance. These highly avoidant individuals, let's say, speaking for myself historically, have a hard time emoting, have a hard time depending on other people, both recognizing their own needs and communicating their own needs. It leads to a kind of lonely prison, a fortress of solitude. So let's say there's avoidance as one dimension of insecurity. The other dimension of insecurity is anxiety. And anxiety, in terms of attachment, relates to questions about one's lovability, one's worth. When we see high anxiety in insecure attachment, we see things like jealousy when the attachment figure's attention goes elsewhere. We see angry protest. We see a kind of hyperactivation of the attachment system, trying to get as close as possible. It's a little needy, it's a little clingy, it's a... Whereas the avoidant is a kind of minimization strategy. complete withdrawal from the attachment figure. The anxious strategy is maximizing. So we see these two different dimensions. And if we plot this out, imagine a two by two grid. You've got avoidance, we'll say, and I'm going to have to clarify whether we're going this way or this way. Bear with me. You've got avoidance and you've got anxiety. Yeah. Let's say someone is low in avoidance and low in anxiety. These are the folks that you would call securely attached. They're confident, they're optimistic, they've got a felt sense of security. They don't worry too much within the relationships. They feel capable to go out and explore because of the relationships. They're able to regulate on their own and they're able to regulate with another person. Security is a good place to be. I'll say the good news of all of this, you can work your way into security. There are corrective experiences that we'll talk about a little later. So let's say, again, low anxiety, low avoidance, you're secure. Low anxiety, high avoidance, this is what we would typically call dismissive, avoidant. These are the folks that I mentioned a bit earlier on, kind of characteristically closed off, shut down. They're unaware of their own needs, unable to communicate their own needs. It's as if they basically learned that their needs aren't going to be met by their caregiver, and so it's just better not to have any needs at all. Tragic. All of these are tragic in some way. So let's say then we have high anxiety, low avoidance. This is what we might call anxious, ambivalent, or resistant attachment. These are the folks, again, that are a little preoccupied in their attachments. It's a maximizing strategy. It's clingy, it's needing. Do you love me? Do I need to prove that I'm worthy of your love? All of these kind of things. Again, tragic in its own way. These individuals are often unable to regulate in the absence of a partner, and so may develop kind of codependent tendencies. Then you have high avoidance and high anxiety. This is called disorganized attachment. It is one of the strongest indicators of pathology. It swings between hot and cold. It's as if I have no needs. I'm not okay by myself. I'm not okay with the other person. It is disorganized. We see intense experiences of dissociative phenomena, really curious psychological situations, awful, awful suffering. Uh, Again, tragic and can be resolved across time. So there's good news at the end of all of this, okay? So these are the four characteristic attachment styles. And as I mentioned, these are able to be identified at 18 months of age. They are predictive of behavior up to 5 or 6 years old. And they are predictive long-term of emotional well-being, mental health, etc., etc. It's good to be secure. We can wish for security. Alas, we have the circumstances, the hand we were dealt, and we can work our way toward developing security. Now, I mentioned that these have historically been characterized in the realm of infant caregiver attachments. Then there was it's got to be like the 80s, there was a move to apply these in adult romantic relationships as well. This is where you see just endless pop psychology articles about is your boyfriend avoidant? Is your girlfriend anxious? All of these things. There's they generalize into that same way. Although the curious thing is that romantic relationships have an added element that isn't present in infant caregiver dynamics. And it's usually minus one of the elements that is present. So attachment gets complicated in romantic relationships. It can't be generalized as readily because romantic relationships typically involve a sexual component, which we hope to God was not present in your early caregiver environment. Uh, Romantic relationships also generally have an absence of a decidedly stronger, wiser other. So for those reasons, we might say the early attachment stuff, it maps onto and will provide a pretty reliable framework for romantic attachment. But romantic attachment cannot be reduced to that because of these two key differences. Now, this led researchers beginning in the 90s to begin to hypothesize that, well, why don't we consider God an attachment figure? I mean, this is really characteristic of most theistic traditions, and in Christianity in particular. Uh, we can have a personal relationship with God, and God is a figure to whom we want to maintain proximity, who is stronger and wiser in every possible way, who provides a safe haven in times of distress, a secure base for exploration out in the world, and the absence or loss of whom is just the dread of dread and the heartbreak of heartbreak. It's the characteristic of hell, right? To be absent from God forever. So researchers began to theorize that, hey, we might want to consider God as an attachment figure. And lo and behold, early research suggested that insecurely attached individuals typically also had insecure attachments with God. Likewise, securely attached individuals tended to have a secure attachment to God. Now, this is brought about by what we would call the correspondence hypothesis, which says that the internal working models of attachment, your kind of blueprints for how relationships work, these are going to correspond across relationships across your lifespan. So that was one of the main hypotheses. Hey, if attachment works, we ought to see that they attach to God similarly to the way they attach to caregivers, and likewise, romantic partners. Lo and behold, there was some support for that. There was this other hypothesis, though, as well, which said, well, actually, in the absence of secure attachment, we ought to expect a compensatory attachment to God to make up for the deficiencies of attachment in early life. And lo and behold, they found support for that too. So insecurely attached folks were much more likely to experience a sudden religious change, a conversion. Boy, there's interesting research. These folks also display more proclivity toward things like glossolalia, speaking in tongues. Really interesting stuff. Likewise, a predilection, as I mentioned before, for dissociative into mystical experience. So go figure. There was some support for that hypothesis too. And this confused researchers for a little while. Boy, is it corresponding? Is it compensatory? Corresponding? Compensatory? Evidence seemed to accrue for both hypotheses. This became nuanced over time with the idea of social correspondence, which basically, if you think back to the social learning aspect of attachment, this means that not only do we need to take into consideration your attachment security in early life, but we also have to consider your religiosity of your household growing up. And what researchers came to find, I'll ask you to imagine another 2 by 2 grid here. Let's say on the one hand, you've got a religious household and a secular household. And then you've got secure attachment and insecure attachment. Now, stands to reason, it makes intuitive sense. If you have a secure attachment within a religious household, then these individuals tend to maintain the faith throughout their lives. They share their parents' religious beliefs and they're securely attached. It's like, hey, you talk about the fact that God is love, and you don't just talk about it, you are about it. It is so evident that what you say and what you do align. Makes sense. Likewise, we also see that securely attached individuals who grew up in secular households maintain a kind of confident lack of involvement in religion. They get along well, they have good relationships with people, they tend not to have much need or use for religion, let's say, until perhaps a crisis comes along, until maybe they have a religious experience, transcendent experience. But for the most part, these folks, they could just live and die, cradle to grave, not all that involved in religion. This is the social aspect. Secure attachments transmit values across generations. Now, insecure attachment. this gets quite interesting. If you are insecurely attached and grew up in a religious household, quite likely this leads to a conflict regarding or a complete loss of faith. And it makes sense. These folks leave the faith. They deconvert in droves because, well, it's hypocrisy, quite frankly. You say one thing, but all of your actions are demonstrating something completely at odds with it. Yeah. Then we have insecure attachment in a secular household. These folks tended to experience the kind of compensatory religious conversion that researchers first hypothesized. So when you have an insecure attachment and you grew up in a secular household, you may eventually find yourself at a crisis point, often related to the loss of an attachment figure, romantic relationship, parent, whatever the case is, which leads to, I mean, the almost cliched crisis of faith that many people experience. Like the world's falling apart, religious conversion. Uh, I don't mean for that to sound mocking. That's actually how I found my way into faith too. Uh, Pretty avoidantly attached throughout most of my life. Life fell apart. God saved me. And hey, life is so much better now. So I don't mean for that to sound blasé. It's just you hear so many stories of this because it touches on something so fundamental. Now, there was an interesting detail here. Researchers found that for the insecurely attached folks who grew up in secular households, who had this compensatory experience, it was like religious conversion. And then, typically, the correspondence models kicked in. So then, typically, what they saw was, okay, a conversion, but a conversion that matches the earlier patterns of insecurity. So if you had a religious conversion, maybe you believe that, wow, God exists, it's undeniable. Whew, but God is distant and cold and detached and judgmental and punitive. Or religious conversion, God exists. Oh God, am I worthy of God's love? Am I close enough? Do I care? Do I need to prove myself? Or, wow, God exists. And oh, I'm living in hell because I'm falling so far short and God is punitive and sadistic and tyrannical. Again, the attachment model often, more often than not, corresponded even after the compensatory experience. So what this suggests to my mind, at least, as I go through researching these things, is that we have a tremendous amount of work to do. Um, I play with a fairly open hand. Uh, I'm of the belief that the ideal is secure attachment in the context of a religious household. Now, there's a reason why. Individuals who have a secure attachment to God experience benefits to well-being, emotional health, purpose, meaning, life, all of this beyond mere religiosity, beyond social benefits, beyond interpersonal attachment, which is to say, surprise, surprise, a relationship with God is uniquely beneficial for a person's life. Okay. So that's the ideal. Boy, the ideal, we so often fall short. No wonder the sins of the fathers are visited generation to generation to generation because these patterns through they transmit across generation through the social environment. It's remarkable how these things come together. Uh, so what I'm suggesting is that your earliest childhood experiences could have a lifelong influence on your relationship with God, mediated by whether or not your household was religious. Uh, I'm fairly confident. We would need probably 30 years to test this. I'm fairly confident that if you showed me a household when an infant is 18 months old, I would be able to predict that individual's religious state 30, 40 years from now. We just look at whether securely or insecurely attached, the manner in which they're insecurely attached, and whether the household is religious or secular. And again, it's going to fit into one of these four categories, right? Secure in the faith, secure in their atheism, agnosticism, atheism, let's say, uh, compensatory religious conversion, or a conflict with or a loss of faith, a deconversion. Uh, Now, all this to say, these internal working models of attachment, these are like the implicit set of assumptions that you bring to attachment relationships. Caregivers, romantic relationships to a certain degree, God, uh, the most part these. It could be other significant relationships, but again, we want to be careful with just throwing around attachment because not every important relationship is an attachment relationship. So these are the implicit rules that govern relationship. Things like how close is too close? How far is too far? Am I okay? Are you okay? Am I trustworthy? Are you trustworthy? Do I know what I need? Do you know how to meet my needs? All of these kind of questions, things that are baked into many of our significant relationships without us typically having conscious awareness of these things. Now, I mentioned that at the end of all of this, there is good news, and that's that regardless of where you are on the different pattern of attachments, whether you are avoidant or anxious or disorganized, whether you grew up in a secular household or religious household, whatever, what we know is that attachment style can be modified. An individual can learn and earn security. Now, this takes place generally through corrective experiences with, go figure, another attachment figure. So this can occur in the context of good psychotherapy. This can occur in the context of romantic relationship with a secure individual. This can occur in the context of a religious experience with God. Uh, I'll say that there's also some very promising research that shifts in attachment can occur as a result of the plasticity that arises from a psychedelic experience. Uh, my personal take would be that we have an ongoing container of emotional regulation. We engage in rigorous psychotherapeutic practice so that we can learn to assess reality effectively, regulate our emotions, mitigate anxiety, learn how to communicate effectively. We do that, and then, if necessary, if qualified, if there are no contraindications, perhaps we then engage in psychedelic practice. We build a container for transformative experience. We engage in transformative experience, and then we work through what arises in that transformative experience. Uh, I've seen over and over and over again that, first of all, let's say, good psychotherapy on its own can work to resolve attachment issues. There's not typically a need for something like psychedelic augmentation. Psychedelic augmentation can benefit in a very unique way. It's not strictly speaking necessary. So if there are moral qualms, health concerns, whatever the case is, if it's illegal, if it's immoral, if it's contraindicated for one of any number of reasons, right? It's not necessary. Patient, consistent, ongoing work in a secure enough relationship will modify attachment across time. It does so, seemingly, through the integration of top and bottom of the brain and left and right parts of the brain, let's say. That is a huge generalization, right? But neuroscientific research seems to suggest that this integration of top and bottom parts of the brain, say like your thinky human parts and your animal parts, that is involved in this process, and the left and right hemispheric integration between the feely, wholeness, emotional, opening part of the brain and the logical, rational, reasonable, analytic part of the brain. When we get this left, right, and top bottom integration, uh, then go figure, our working models of ourselves and our world and the people within that world change. This occurs in the context of good psychotherapy. This can change in the context of a secure, loving relationship. And of course, this can change through a religious encounter, a transcendent experience wherein one, golly, I don't know, communicates directly with God and has a firsthand felt sense of God's enduring love for them. Eh, it's possible, happens. Uh, so all of this to say, I hope if nothing else, this is interesting. This is grist for the mill to help you begin to reflect upon your own experiences of relationships with your parents, with significant others, with God. What you'll likely find is that there are characteristic patterns. Those patterns likely have something to do with these dimensions of avoidance and anxiety. Are you clingy in your relationships? Are you totally withdrawn and walled off from your relationships? Are you some hot, cold swing in between mixture of the two? Uh, Regardless, this can and does change across time, provided you put yourself in the appropriate context. If you have additional questions about that and how that looks, feel free to drop that in the comments. If this brings up other ideas, curiosities, if you want to have a heated debate of some kind, available for that too. Feel free to drop that in the comments down below as well. And let's see, is there anything else? Trauma, attachment, and God. No, that's the high level view. Anyway, I hope this has been fruitful. I find these things very interesting for myself. Anyway, be blessed. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.